We're now in the home stretch of the ACC basketball season. College baseball has started. And we've seen some teams who had great weeks last week really stumble this week. Duke truly reasserted themselves coming off that heartbreaking loss at Chapel Hill to the Tar Heels. They really bounced back in a strong way this week. Miami had a huge week. Let's dive into all of it now in our ACC Power Rankings. As always, don't forget to hype this video, like this video, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate all of you who have done that. Heard from a lot of you and the teams you cheer for, so I'll try to spend a little bit more time on those teams. And if you haven't chimed in the comments before, let me know who's your team, why are you watching, and I try to give you a little bit more love, a little bit more time for your team next time. But I'm not going to give a lot of time to these three teams. Each of them lost all their games this week. Each of them, I think, will miss the ACC tournament, and I think there's a good shot all of them have new coaches next year. Interesting one will be Jeff Cable at Pitt because they have a very good recruiting class. We'll see how that all turns out, but dark times for these three. This next group, I've kind of separated them from the bottom three because they're what I call spoilers. In fact, I think Florida State's a really, really tough team to be playing right now, but all of them at least have something going for them. If we look at Notre Dame, had them at 15. They finally picked up their third conference win, beat Georgia Tech in really a blowout after losing to SMU this week. And that's sort of what led to sort of the split in tiers, is that Notre Dame, while they're having a bad year, they do seem like a whole nother tier above Boston College, Georgia Tech, and Pitt. And so that's where you see the split. This group here that I just showed outside of the bottom three is what I call spoilers. They're the ones who are they're a little dangerous, just good enough to wreck the tournament hopes of the teams above them. Stanford lost to Wake Forest. Before that, they beat Boston College this week. They really needed to go out east, beat Boston College and Wake. Those are two of the weaker teams in the conference. If they'd done that, they'd have some momentum and maybe a tournament shot. But losing to Wake really ended their hopes. And it's interesting, they were actually kind of inconsistent this year. Earlier in the year, they beat Minnesota and St. Louis. St. Louis is tracking to be like a 5-seed, so they're pretty good. Beat them back-to-back. They also knocked off Louisville and Virginia Tech back-to-back. But now they've lost 6 of 8. And the only 2 of those wins are Georgia Tech and Boston College. So Stanford's really faded, and they dropped from 11 down to 14 in these power rankings. Above them is Wake Forest, who just beat – they actually had a good week. They blew out Georgia Tech. Again, that's why Tech's in a whole tier down from this group. And then Juke Harris was at the free throw line all day as they beat Stanford. Now now Wake Forest will go and they'll play host to Clemson. That's going to be an interesting one. Clemson struggling. 2 straight losses for Clemson. Does Wake Forest really send them into a tailspin, or is it a soft landing for Clemson? Above them is Cal. Cal really needed to sweep what I'm calling their Yankee road trip, where they played at Syracuse and at Boston College. They were tied with Syracuse in the first half. They were tied with them in the second half, but they lost to Syracuse in overtime. They beat Boston College, but really, like Syracuse, needed to win both of those. They're now 5-7. They dropped 2 spots from 10 to 12 in these power rings, and they're probably done too. So they go from kind of tournament fringe hopeful to just a spoiler. Syracuse is exactly the type of team that's kind of bad for the conference, right? Like they were not very good early in the year. They've gotten better. They're now dangerous. They popped the tournament bubble for Cal. And as they play these kind of remaining games, they have no tournament hopes, but their early struggles will kind of have them in a Ken Pom and a Nets tier that's not very, it's kind of a lose-lose. You beat them. Whew, thank goodness, because you couldn't afford to lose to a team as bad as Syracuse, but they're playing pretty good basketball and they're not that bad, and you could actually lose that game. And you don't get much credit for a win because of their struggles earlier in the year. And so Syracuse at 5-7 is a spoiler. Virginia Tech was kind of right on that bubble, but they blew it this week. They beat Clemson. They were just incredibly hot from 3, 11 for 21. And then they were also lucky that Clemson couldn't make a free throw. And that gave them this huge upset win that put them probably on the right side of the bubble. Then they go home and they're blown out by Florida State, and that kind of ends their year. So now they're in the spoiler tier. And then Florida State is the ultimate spoiler. The absolute worst kind of thing you can have in a conference is they were so bad early in the year that their net and their Ken Pom rankings and ratings are terrible. They're 82 in net. They actually jumped up all the way from 95, but still pretty bad in the net rankings. They're not going to give you certainly a quad 1 kind of win, but they're playing really good basketball right now. And so it's kind of a worst case scenario in that no credit if you beat them, but if you lose to them, it hurts, and they're actually good. Florida State is exactly the type of team that causes problems. They're going to get they're going to get Boston College at home. That should be another win for them. That'll extend their win streak. They were 5-1 entering. I shouldn't say win streak, but like they're good stretch. They're 5-1 entering this week. Then they split this week with Virginia, who they played close, and then they blew out the Hokies. So they're 6-2 in their last 8. They're going to get Boston College. They'll probably adds another win. Then they go to Clemson, and right now they're playing better basketball than Clemson. Really tempted to have Florida State higher just because of how well they're playing right now. Of course, I do try to weigh like resume into this at least a little bit. So they're kind of stuck at 9 because they're not a tournament hopeful because they're a bad start. But right now they're really dangerous, and they're going to knock some teams down in the seeding. They just probably knocked Virginia Tech out of the tournament. So we'll see. They are the ultimate spoiler. All right, I'm going to pause here and say, hey, don't forget, if you enjoy these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course, let me know who's your team in the comments. I try to spend a little bit more time on the teams that folks are tuning in to hear about. Now, let's dive into some of these top teams. All right, SMU had a not ideal week. They beat Notre Dame, but then they lose a closer one to Syracuse. That drops them to 6-6 in the ACC. Igotolu, their center, who's like a classic old school center who's actually really good, rim protector, a rebounder, a true center, scores around around the basket. I really like Sam Igotolu. Fouls out in that game. You know, it's an overtime game, but still they lose to Syracuse. And now, you know, where earlier they were a couple spots higher in these power rankings, they felt like a lock. You know, their losses to date have been Duke again, Clemson, Louisville, Virginia. That's fine. But at a certain point, you got to start picking up wins, and they're only 6-6. Now, the good news for SMU is their schedule eases up. Looks like Louisville and Miami are the only tournament teams left on the schedule for SMU, and both of them are at home. The rest of them are very winnable. Very much could finish 5-1, could finish 11-7 overall in the tournament, in the ACC, which I think would get them in the tournament fairly comfortably. But they probably need to beat either Louisville or Miami to get another quality win. They have the UNC win, of course, but probably need one more. So a little bit dicey now for SMU after that kind of a tough loss to Syracuse. And again, that's what I'm saying. Syracuse, Florida State, those teams kind of spoilers, possibly taking out one or two tournament teams from the ACC. Now, NC State, I had them at 3. I've got a lot of comments from NC State folks and NC State haters in these videos saying they're too low, now they're too high. Well, I moved them all the way up to 3, and then I think they had the worst week of anyone in the ACC. They were embarrassed by Louisville. Just a really, really just, you know, giving up, I think, was it 118 points to Louisville? Just unthinkable. The coach, I'm kind of at a loss for words for what went down. So let me back up. They lose at Louisville 77-118. They gave up 56 points in the first half, and then they kind of quit. At least defensively, gave up another 62 in the second half. Louisville poured it on 118-77. Super embarrassing loss for NC State. Then they come home and they play Miami, and they lead most of the way. They're up by 7 with under a minute to go. They give up an and one. Then they give up an offensive rebound that turns to a putback. They turn the ball over. They foul a three-point shooter. Darian Williams, their star player, fouls a three-point shooter. Basically, his time is expiring, more or less. There's like 3 seconds left. He makes all 3. They don't get a good shot. They don't. It wasn't the worst shot, but Abel gets a kind of mediocre shot up as time expires, misses it, and they lose to Miami. Blown lead at home. So back-to-back losses. Afterwards, Will Wade, another kind of immature press conference where he says, you know, they ask him about the tournament, and he says, you know, we lost to Georgia Tech, kind of insulting Georgia Tech, which I know they're not good. And I know Damon Stoudemire might not even be there next year, but still, like, I don't know why you're taking digs at Georgia Tech, kicking them while they're down. Calls his own team soft, which maybe they are, but like, it's very strange. It's very strange to see how he manages the press and tries to push buttons through the media for his team. But they drop all the way down to 7. I think they're still solidly in the tournament, at least for now, but very, very bad week for NC State. Let me pull up their schedule, see who they have next. it gets tough here because they have North Carolina at home and then go to Virginia. Kind of a losing streak risk here. You lose both of those, and all of a sudden you start worrying, you're on the bubble at that point. Then they close the season with at Notre Dame, then Duke at home, then Stanford at home. So, losing to Duke almost doesn't count. And then you got 2 wins you could sort of not pocket, they're spoilers, but feel decent about. But you can't go 0-2 this week. Can't have a 4-game losing streak late in the year. So tough spot for NC State. They drop a ton. UNC went 1-1 this week. They blew out Pitt, but before that, they went to Miami and lost. But the bigger note is Caleb Wilson broke his hand, and we don't know how long he's out for. But I don't think they're a top 5 team in this conference without Caleb Wilson. They're 8-4. The teams above them have a better record. So I went ahead and dropped UNC all the way down. I think it was from like maybe 2 or 3, all the way down to 6. So a big drop for them as well. They were 2 last week. So they dropped all the way from 2 to 6. And then let's talk about Clemson. Really bad week for Clemson. They just played a garbage game against Virginia Tech. They came out without the energy, without the life. I don't know if it's because they had that great road trip out west to Cal, Stanford and Cal, and they blew out Cal and they came home. Maybe they were reading their own press clippings. Maybe they were tired from the travel. Maybe it was just an off night. But Virginia Tech played one of their best games of the year. They were crazy hot from 3. That's always discouraging when you play great defense, force a not so good look, and it goes in. And that's what was happening against Virginia Tech. But also, Clemson's guards played pretty bad defense and pretty bad offense. And Clemson's guards, it's been a couple games now where they look really bad. So mediocre defense and then also mediocre free throw shooting. A lot of missed free throws. Really could have won the game if they can, maybe Lawal, who's not a good three-point shooter, doesn't go 2 for 2 against them. They make a couple of free throws and they could easily pull out that game against Virginia Tech, but things don't go their way. So they go to Duke and the defense looks great. They hold Duke down, and it seems like Clemson's the team really that has a very, very good shot at an upset, but they are missing every good look. They get layups and open threes. And that's what you scheme for. You want shots around the basket and good looks from 3 for 3 points for the higher effective field goal percentage. And Clemson just couldn't make them. And again, Clemson guards were bad. Basically all the guards had 4 points each. Buddy Johnson wasn't hot. Ace Buckner missed some layups. Dylan Hunter has been a real minus. He's kind of regressed back to sophomore, junior year form. He started off the year and it was like, okay, we're seeing another step. Maybe he's not Chase, but he's like super efficient and a leader, and he's clutch. And he made those big free throws. I think it was against Cincinnati, and it was like he's really emerged as maybe not the star player, but the leader and like super solid, reliable. And now he's like disappeared. So I don't know if there's an injury or some personal stuff, but he's been really bad. He needs to get better. Justin Porter is a little bit of a streaky shooter, so I worry less about him. But having him, be a little bit more cold right now, at the same time that Dylan is struggling and Butta is struggling, and Ace has had, one off night against Duke, but generally he's been good. He's had to carry the load, and they might have to be more fluid in minutes because he's been their best guard lately, and they've got to get him on the court if everyone else is still struggling. So bad spot for Clemson. Now they're still 10-3. They're still perfectly good shot at a top 4 seed, even a 3 seed in the the ACC tournament. They're probably looking at more like a 7, 8, 9 seed in March. But honestly, if you told me at the beginning of the year they'd be a 7, 8, 9 seed, I thought they'd be like a 10 or even a play-in 11 seed entering the year. So the season's still, better than planned, better than expected, but don't let it get away from you now. If you're Clemson, they go to Wake Forest, really should be a win. Then they host Florida State, which I'm more worried about than the road game because Florida State is just playing great basketball right now. So that's a scary week. Either one of those will count as a bad loss, even though I think road losses and Florida State, the way they're playing right now, neither of them really are. But they're both going to hurt the resume a lot. You got to win both of these, in part because the schedule's about to get a lot harder. So they go Wake Forest, Florida State, and then they end the year Louisville at home, at North Carolina, before Georgia Tech. So 2 really tough games back-to-back prior to ending with Georgia Tech, who, by the way, Georgia Tech's done great at Clemson, has had their number at Clemson specifically. Clemson always wins in Atlanta. They seem to always win at Clemson. So those last 3 are dangerous. I think Clemson's got to go 2-0 this week if they want to be a top 4 seed in the ACC tournament and want more than call it a 8-9 seed. If you want to get to kind of a 7 line, got to go perfect 2-0 this week. So Really bad week for all of North Carolina, UNC, and Clemson. Brutal week for all of them. All right, now the very top tier, Miami. I jumped Miami above Clemson because Miami's playing better basketball than Clemson. A great week for the Hurricanes. Tremendous week for them. Their tournament chances a week ago were like 50-50, and now they're pretty much a lock. They had a back and forth game with North Carolina, went their way in the end. They basically trailed and just kind of stayed alive for most of the game against NC State. And NC State was up with under a minute. They're up 7 with under a minute. They go 3-point play. Then they get a stop, and it's like an offensive rebound that they put back, makes it a 2-point game. There's multiple missed 1-and-1s or missed free throws on both sides, and they get another chance out. They get a decent look from 3, and Darian Williams fouls the 3-point shooter and buries all 3 of them. Darian Williams also kicked a guy, got a technical foul in that game, kind of brought Miami back, or maybe not brought him back, but like kept him alive. A big moment in that game. Darian Williams getting a technical, which was absolutely deserved, and then also fouling the 3-point shooter. I don't know if it was a wrong call, but it was a close call. I think if he doesn't airball that, it doesn't get called. But nonetheless, Miami comes through twice against UNC and NC State. Huge for Miami. Let's see what they've got upcoming. They are 4-3 in quad 1 and 4-1 in quad 2, by the way. They're still only 35th in KenPom, in the net, but I think they're pretty good. They'll host Virginia Tech, who, again, spoiler alert, Virginia Tech just there to hurt the ACC at this point because they're sort of done. And then Virginia on the road. I mean, if they win both of those, they pretty much lock up their tournament bid. Probably need to beat either Virginia, SMU, or Louisville to get maybe one more really good win and kind of move up the seed line. But I think Miami is in a good spot now. Above them, Louisville. Louisville was awesome this week. They just embarrassed NC State. Their offense looked just totally elite, really, really impressive. And then they also had a non-conference game, which is weird, but this is kind of more popular. I do like that they've stopped putting a weird ACC game square in the middle of like kind of early non-conference play, but instead now what a lot of teams are doing are taking one non-conference game, kind of a marquee game like Duke, Michigan next weekend, and they slip it late into the conference play, which is a fun kind of break it up. So I do like it, but it's still weird to me. But Texas went to Baylor and got a win. Hadley scored 20 points and Mikal Brown had 29. Against NC State, it was 45 for Mikal Brown. And Ryan Conwell added 31. So then above them is Virginia. And Virginia's a little bit weird. They've won 6 in a row. Close wins this week over Florida State and Ohio State. I think the way Florida State's playing, that kind of feels like a quad 1 game right now. They did it in Tallahassee too, so that's impressive. But Virginia doesn't like have the star power. I know they have DeRidder, but they don't have like a Caleb Wilson or a Cameron Boozer. And they're not like as flashy as a Louisville where their offense can explode for 118 points, but Virginia is very good kind of all around, just a very well-rounded team. They remind me honestly of probably a more talented version of Clemson, and that they just play good team basketball. They're well coached. They're well built. They've got size, but they can also shoot. They're probably like a better shooting Clemson in a way. And I think they're really good. Ryan Odom, we'll see how the rest of the year shakes out, but I think Ryan Odom and Brad Brownell are the 2 candidates for coach of the year. Before this week, I would have said give it to Brad Brownell. Now I think it's a little bit more of a toss-up. We'll see how Virginia finishes the year. And then number 1 is Duke. They really reasserted themselves this week. They get a blowout win over Pitt, which is fine. Everyone blows them out. But then against Clemson, when Clemson didn't make shots early, Pitt kind of seized the momentum and they pushed the lead to about 20 points and held on from there. But they play great defense. Like, they're not an elite shooting team like NC State. They don't kind of run quite like Louisville, but they're efficient offensively, and they're just as good right there with Clemson defensively. And to have that balance, to be, like Houston last year kind of defense, Clemson this year kind of defense, but then also be really, really good offensively, that kind of makes them a Final Four team. That makes them the type of team who could go win a national championship. And the net loves them. Let me back this up. In the net, they are all the way up to number 2, right behind Michigan. They've jumped Arizona. They were 3 last week, and they jumped Arizona with a Clemson win. So Duke has really bounced back from that UNC win, while UNC had an injury and a loss to Miami. So that's in the past. Obviously, it's a great rivalry moment that'll kind of live on forever for Seth Trimble and UNC fans, but Duke really reasserting themselves as number one in the conference. Hey, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe. And next week, I'll introduce a new partner where you can follow your favorite college athletes now in the pros. So stay tuned. Don't miss out next week. And thanks for watching.